Imagine, just for a moment, that as you sit quietly in your living room, a version of you living somewhere not in space, but in frequency is watching over your choices. This version is not a metaphor or a spiritual fantasy. It is you, and not in the poetic sense, but in the very real and increasingly supported realm of quantum physics and consciousness research. Imagine her or him, this parallel you, perhaps older or younger, wiser, calmer, already having faced and overcome the challenges you currently carry. That version exists, and more importantly, it may already be sending you signs. For most of us, the idea of parallel realities feels like something pulled from the pages of science fiction. But science itself is evolving. In quantum mechanics, particularly in the many-worlds interpretation proposed by Hugh Everett in the 1950s, the suggestion is simple yet staggering. Every decision we make causes the universe to split, branching into different outcomes. The version of you that turned left instead of right, that stayed married instead of walking away, that pursued music or ministry or medicine rather than playing it safe, all of those selves are still living out their journeys somewhere. Now, I know this may sound abstract, even fantastical, especially if you've lived a life built on practicality and discipline. But consider the double-slit experiment, a cornerstone of quantum physics. When electrons are fired through two slits and unobserved, they behave like waves, creating patterns of probability. But when we observe them, they collapse into particles, into one defined outcome. What changes the outcome is observation consciousness. What we focus on quite literally shapes reality. This isn't New Age wishful thinking. It is experimental physics. And yet, ancient spiritual traditions have echoed similar ideas for thousands of years. Indigenous cultures, Eastern mystics, and even early Christian mystics like Meister Eckhart spoke of layered realities, of inner voices that guide us beyond the veil of what is visible. The mystics called it divine intuition. Today, scientists may call it access to parallel information fields or quantum resonance. What matters more than the terminology is the potential. What if we could intentionally align with the version of ourselves who has already made the choices we now long to make? Let me give you a practical example. I once met a retired engineer from Detroit. At age 68, he told me about a recurring dream he was living on the coast, painting, surrounded by laughter and the sound of waves. This version of himself felt deeply familiar. He had never painted a day in his life, but the image was so vivid, so persistent, that he decided to buy a set of brushes. 2 years later, he's selling landscapes to local galleries and says he feels more himself than ever. What happened? I believe he tapped into a version of himself already living that life and followed the call. This is not magic. It is resonance. Every thought, every emotional state, emits a vibration. These vibrations align us with different possibilities. If you are constantly anxious, you may remain stuck in realities where struggle defines you. But if you begin to shift into trust, gratitude, and curiosity, even just a little, you start tuning in to a new set of frequencies. Think of a radio. The music has always been there. You just had to change the dial. This means your habits matter. Your focus matters. And yes, even your imagination matters. The mind, especially as we age, can become a portal not just to memories, but to new doorways. Neuroplasticity doesn't stop at 25. The brain continues to rewire itself even into your 90s. And if the brain is a receiver of consciousness, not just a generator, as increasingly suggested by the likes of Carl Pribram and David Bohm, then you have far more control than you ever imagined over which you choose to embody. So how do you start tuning in? First, begin to pay attention to moments that feel familiar, but have no explanation. Déjà vu, strange dreams, subtle nudges. Second, set aside time each morning for quiet reflection, even just 10 minutes. Ask, what does my higher self want me to know today? Then trust what arises. Third, notice what you're drawn to, even if it doesn't make sense. A book, a place, a class, a hobby. These are often clues. Finally, speak to that future version of you as if they are already walking with you. Because they are. And here's the most practical truth of all. You do not need to be young to change your life. You do not need to be fast or clever or spiritual. You only need to become available. The universe is not asking you to be different. It is simply inviting you to remember the fuller self you already are. and to reach across time with courage and say, I'm listening. Let's begin. There are moments in life when something strange happens, moments so subtle that they slip past unnoticed unless we are paying close attention. You're walking down the street and suddenly you feel like you've been there before, though you know you haven't. Or a phrase slips from a stranger's mouth, word for word, exactly as it appeared in a dream you had 3 nights ago. These are not coincidences. These are communications, signs, nudges from a version of yourself that lives beyond your current timeline, beyond the visible thread of this reality. Philosophers have long believed that knowledge can arise from within, unprovoked by direct experience. Plato called it anamnesis, the idea that learning is remembering what the soul already knows. And now, surprisingly, science begins to catch up. Carl Jung described synchronicity as meaningful coincidences that are not causally related yet connected by meaning. These moments, when things align so perfectly it's as if reality is being orchestrated from behind the curtain, are not tricks of the mind. They may be echoes from another path you are already walking elsewhere. In the world of neuroscience, researchers are beginning to understand that perception is far from objective. The brain is a prediction machine, constantly constructing reality based on previous patterns. But what if some of these predictions are not drawn only from past experiences, but also from potential futures that other versions of you have already lived? When you feel an unexplainable familiarity with a new situation, like you've seen it in a dream or felt it in a memory you don't quite own, your brain may be picking up on information from an alternate version of your life, resonating through shared consciousness. Quantum entanglement teaches us that particles can be linked across vast distances, responding instantaneously to each other's state. If particles can remain connected across time and space, perhaps our inner selves can, too. Perhaps versions of you across the multiverse remain entangled through the web of shared awareness. Let's ground this in something practical. Consider the phenomenon of déjà vu. It's been studied by cognitive scientists who suggest it may be a neural mismatch, a misfiring in memory circuits. But many who've experienced it know it goes deeper. It often happens during times of decision or transition, when you're standing on the edge of change. What if déjà vu is not an error, but a signal? A sign that a version of you has already walked this path and is urging you to trust where you are. Or take dreams, particularly vivid or lucid dreams, where you awaken with a strong emotional imprint, often leave you with more questions than answers. The neuroscience of dreaming tells us that REM sleep is when the brain consolidates memory and explores problem solving. But mystics and modern psychologists alike suggest that dreams can also be doorways to alternate versions of the self. I've spoken to veterans who dreamed of younger versions of themselves choosing different lives, and to widows who met their late partners in dreams so vivid, it restored a sense of love and guidance. These are not meaningless mental events. They may be the mind's way of crossing dimensions. Then there are synchronicities, the repeated numbers, recurring symbols, unexpected alignments. Say you're considering a change in career late in life, and suddenly you keep hearing the same phrase, seeing the same image, or meeting people who mention exactly what you're thinking about. The probability of this being pure chance is mathematically low. But the probability of this being meaningful, especially when it stirs something deep inside you, is worth listening to. Cognitive psychology reminds us that the reticular activating system in the brain filters information based on what we deem important. When you begin to attune yourself to possibility, your mind begins to notice patterns that support it. But beyond this, what if your future self is guiding your attention to those patterns in the first place? This is where the spiritual and scientific meet. Across the globe, traditions have long spoken of ancestors, spirits, or inner guides. Whether you believe in spirits or not, there is a growing consensus among consciousness researchers that information may not be bound by linear time. The Global Consciousness Project, for example, has recorded data suggesting that human consciousness may subtly respond to events before they occur. What if you're not only remembering the past, but also receiving signals from the future or from alternate lives? So here is a suggestion, not as a philosopher alone, but as someone who has spent decades sitting with people who dared to wonder. Start keeping track. Write down moments that feel strange or out of place. Keep a dream journal beside your bed. Begin to collect these fragments of insight as if they were pieces of a puzzle. Pay attention to what repeats. When something resonates, don't dismiss it. Reflect. Ask, what might this be pointing me toward? Then act on its small steps at first. A phone call, a walk, a class, an apology. Trust that if the message keeps coming, it carries weight. You are not alone in this life. The other yous are speaking. And the more you listen, the more clearly you'll hear them. It takes only a little openness, a little attention, and a willingness to believe that the universe might be more layered, more alive, and more responsive to you than you ever imagined. Let this be the beginning of a conversation with yourself, not as you were or even as you are, but as you could be. When we begin to understand that parallel versions of ourselves might exist, not just as ideas but as real energetic possibilities, the natural question arises. How do we connect with them, and why should we? The answer lies not only in the pursuit of philosophical curiosity, but in the deeply practical realization that these versions may hold the wisdom we need most right now. Imagine a version of yourself who is already healed from the wounds you still carry, who has found purpose in retirement, joy in solitude, courage in uncertainty. That version is not a fantasy. It is an extension of your own potential, and with conscious effort, you can begin to align with it. The concept of resonance, both spiritual and scientific, teaches us that like attracts like. In physics, when two tuning forks vibrate at the same frequency, one can cause the other to sing. Similarly, when you begin to adopt the emotions, thoughts, and behaviors of a higher version of yourself, you draw closer to that reality. This is not metaphor, it is vibration. Quantum physics shows us that matter is not solid at its core, but made of energy vibrating at different frequencies. Every emotion you feel, every belief you hold, emits a unique vibrational signature. Gratitude, for instance, has been measured in studies using HeartMath Institute's technology to produce a coherent heart rhythm, which in turn harmonizes brain activity and supports immune function. This isn't just spiritual language, it is measurable. And when you live in that state of coherence, you attract experiences and perceptions aligned with higher emotional states. From a philosophical standpoint, this is the path of embodiment. Not chasing after some future self, but choosing each day to become more of who you already are in your fullest expression. Aristotle called this entelechy, the inner drive of a being to realize its full potential, like an acorn growing into an oak. Your choices, what you think, how you speak, what you dwell upon are the soil in which your parallel self can take root in this reality. Let's bring this into the real world. Say you often feel stuck, limited by regrets, illness, or a sense that your best years are behind you. Begin by imagining the opposite, not in a dreamy, unrealistic way, but as an act of energetic alignment. Who is the version of you who wakes up with purpose, moves with ease, smiles without bitterness? What time do they rise? What do they eat? How do they speak to themselves? Begin to borrow these habits now, one at a time. For example, if that version takes daily walks in the morning light, try stepping outside tomorrow, even just for 5 minutes. If they practice gratitude before bed, begin tonight with 3 things you're thankful for. These are not empty rituals. They are tuning mechanisms, like adjusting a radio to pick up a clearer signal from the self you are calling forth. It's important to note that this is not about pretending that pain or limitation doesn't exist. Quite the opposite. It is about acknowledging those realities, but choosing to bring into the room another voice, the voice of a wiser self, a healed self, one who remembers that life is still offering possibilities. Neuroscience supports this as well. Studies on neuroplasticity reveal that the brain continues to adapt, even into late life, forming new pathways in response to thought, intention, and behavior. The more you act from a place of expansion, the more your brain rewires itself to support that version of reality. This is why small daily actions matter. They are not just changes in routine, they are signals to the universe and your own nervous system that you are ready to shift timelines. I met a woman once in her 70s who said she began learning the cello after dreaming, night after night, of performing in a small concert hall. She'd never played a musical instrument before, but she followed the pull, rented a cello, and began to learn. 2 years later, she played her first recital at a local church, tears in her eyes, saying, "I feel like I finally met myself." That is alignment. That is what happens when we stop assuming that the past holds all the truth and start asking what the future might be trying to say. So today, I encourage you not only to believe in the existence of your parallel selves, but to engage with them. Choose one small action that reflects who you wish to become. Speak a word of encouragement aloud, even if only to yourself. Rearrange a space in your home to reflect the new energy you are inviting in. Practice stillness and listen for inner guidance. And when doubt arises, remind yourself that this is not make-believe. It is the natural result of a universe that responds to frequency and a soul that longs to remember itself fully. The journey to your highest self does not begin someday. It begins now, in the quiet courage to choose differently, to live as though the life you desire is not only possible, but already unfolding through you. Once we accept that our thoughts and actions emit a kind of frequency, and that these frequencies help us align with versions of ourselves already living in more peaceful, abundant, or fulfilled realities, the next step is learning how to consciously raise and sustain that vibration. This is not philosophy for its own sake, nor is it a call to escape the ordinary. It is a deeply practical invitation to choose the quality of your experience through small, intentional shifts in how you live. In quantum physics, particularly in the study of superposition and wave function collapse, we see that particles exist in a state of potential until observed. The observer's consciousness, through attention and intention, collapses the wave into a single outcome. In simpler terms, where we place our awareness determines what reality crystallizes before us. And just like that, the ancient spiritual principle that energy flows where attention goes becomes a scientific truth. Now think about what you give your attention to each day. The news cycle, regrets, aches and pains, endless to-do lists. While these are real and deserve compassion, they also carry vibrational weight. Dwelling there anchors you to a version of yourself that may be struggling or disconnected. But what if you could lift your attention gently toward a version of yourself who feels grounded, grateful, and alive? That shift begins with deliberate, practical habits. One of the most effective is gratitude. The HeartMath Institute has shown that just 3 minutes of sincere gratitude can shift your heart rhythm into coherence, reduce cortisol, and increase immune response. But beyond biology, gratitude is a tuning fork. Each time you name what is good, even if it is small, a warm cup of coffee, the sound of birds, the fact that you woke up, you harmonize with a reality where peace is already present. Begin your day with 3 gratitudes, spoken aloud if possible, and you will feel the shift almost immediately. Then there is meditation. Not the complicated, rigid practice that requires silence or perfection, but a simple returning to stillness, to breath. Studies using fMRI imaging have shown that even brief daily meditation strengthens the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for focus, compassion, and decision-making. It also quiets the default mode network, the part associated with self-referential thought and anxiety. In spiritual language, meditation opens the veil between realities. In scientific terms, it calms the nervous system and creates new neural pathways. When you meditate with the intention to connect with a more aligned version of yourself, you are bridging realities with your own awareness. Try this each morning. Sit quietly and visualize a version of you already living the life you seek. Where are they? What are they doing? How do they feel? Don't force the image. Let it emerge. Even if it's faint, allow yourself to absorb that vibration. Over time, this becomes more than imagination, it becomes a lived frequency. Food, too, carries vibration. Processed and chemical-heavy foods lower our energy and fog the mind. Natural, nutrient-rich foods raise our clarity and vitality. You don't need to overhaul your entire diet overnight, but begin to make one conscious choice per meal. Add a fresh fruit. Choose water instead of soda. Say a quiet word of thanks before you eat. These are acts of energy alignment, not just health maintenance. Likewise, movement is vital. Gentle walks, stretching, even gardening allow energy to circulate and release stagnation. When you move your body, you shift your state. And as neuroscience shows us, changing your physical state alters your mental state, and your mental state alters your perception of reality. But perhaps most important of all is the intention behind these practices. Anyone can go through the motions of meditation or eating well or expressing gratitude. But when you infuse these acts with purpose, with the inner declaration that you are aligning with your highest self, they become transformative. That version of you, already at peace, already in flow, is not out of reach. It is simply vibrating at a frequency you can choose to meet. Think of every conscious breath, every kind word to yourself, every moment of stillness as a thread connecting you to that higher life. Over time, these threads become a bridge. So begin today not by trying to change everything, but by choosing one act of alignment. Maybe it's pausing before your coffee to feel gratitude. Maybe it's sitting in silence for 5 minutes with your hand on your heart. Maybe it's calling someone just to share love. Let it be small. Let it be honest. Because with each act of conscious living, you are not only raising your vibration, you are tuning into a reality where you are already whole. And that is the most powerful act you can take at any age, from any place, with any past. You are not waiting for a new life to arrive. You are remembering it step by step, breath by breath, into being. Once you begin to recognize the signs, raise your vibration, and align with higher versions of yourself, the journey does not end there, it deepens. Because the true power lies not just in observing or even connecting with these parallel selves, but in integrating their wisdom into your daily life. This is where transformation becomes tangible, where theory becomes practice, where the abstract becomes embodied, and where change, no matter your age, becomes not only possible but inevitable. The bridge between you and your highest self is not made of lightning bolts or visions alone. It is built through steady choices, through acts of remembrance, through courage to apply what you have sensed in moments of insight. Just as the nervous system learns through repetition, so too does your soul integrate truth through consistent action. Neurobiologists call this synaptic plasticity, the process by which our brains rewire based on new input. When you begin to act from a place of alignment with your higher self, those new neural pathways are strengthened, and over time, your inner and outer world reshape around them. Think of it this way. If a version of you already lives in greater peace, fulfillment, or purpose, that version likely thinks differently, speaks differently, makes decisions from a place of clarity instead of fear. Begin to mirror those qualities, even imperfectly, and you activate a biological and spiritual resonance that draws that life closer. Start small. If your higher self wakes with a sense of calm, then before your feet touch the ground in the morning, take one deep breath and say, "Today, I choose clarity." If that self speaks with kindness, then choose one moment in your day to pause before reacting and respond with softness instead. If that self creates, learns, explores, or forgives, do one act today that reflects that intention. This is not performance. It is practice. And every act of practice, no matter how small, sends a signal to your mind, your heart, and even the quantum field around you that you are ready to step into a different reality. Now, you may ask, how do I know which signs are real? How do I trust the feelings, the dreams, the synchronicities? The answer lies in cultivating what both philosophers and psychologists call inner discernment. Carl Jung once said that intuition does not denote something contrary to reason, but something outside the province of reason. That means intuition is not irrational, it is suprarational. It is often the quietest voice in the room, the soft pull rather than the loud push. Begin to journal your experiences. Note the symbols, the dreams, the emotional nudges that visit you. Over time, patterns emerge. What repeats is worth your attention. Science has shown that writing down insights helps to encode them more deeply in the brain. And once you begin to see these patterns, you can begin to act on them with more confidence. Perhaps you keep dreaming of water and ocean, a lake, a river. Ask yourself what water represents. Flow? Cleansing? Depth? Now ask, where in your life are you being called to flow instead of resist? To cleanse instead of cling? To explore what lies beneath the surface instead of staying on the shore? You might also feel drawn to new interests, habits, or even people you cannot explain. Follow that thread. The person you've become over decades carries great wisdom, but the self that is still unfolding has even more to share. Just as your body renews itself at the cellular level every 7 years, so too can your identity be renewed not from scratch, but through evolution. Theologian Pierre Teilhard de Chardin once wrote, "We are not human beings having a spiritual experience, We are spiritual beings having a human experience. Integration is the process of allowing those spiritual truths to shape your human decisions. If a parallel version of you is living with more joy, ask what decisions brought them there. If they are healthy, ask what habits they sustained. Then begin to apply that wisdom right here, right now. The most important part of this integration is consistency. Not perfection, not waiting for a grand epiphany, but returning each day to the practices that align you with your chosen reality. Meditation, reflection, movement, intention, connection, these are not luxuries. They are tools for embodiment. When practiced regularly, they open the channel wider. The signs become clearer. The path becomes less foggy. And you begin to walk through life with a sense of quiet authority that says, I know who I am becoming, because I've already met that self in my dreams, in my thoughts, in the synchronicities that found me, and now in my choices. So today, ask yourself this: what one message from your inner or parallel self have you been ignoring? What truth have you known quietly, perhaps for years, but haven't yet acted on? And what is the smallest, most loving step you can take toward honoring that truth? Take that step. Speak that word. Change that habit. Because each action you take in alignment with your higher self doesn't just change your path, it changes your frequency. And when your frequency changes, so does your world. You don't have to chase transformation. You only need to make room for it, one moment at a time, until the life you once imagined becomes the life you are living.